Hey, welcome to the Product Team Success Podcast with me, Ross Webb. Today, I'm super excited because not only is a real good dear friend of mine, Jonathan Boice, joining me, but I think that you, the listeners and viewers, are going to get so much out of today's conversation, right? So Jonathan has got tons and tons of experience. He's worked at some real large orgs as a product manager like Apple and some other small orgs. And I had the real pleasure during the pandemic that when everything was kind of negative and it looked like the world was kind of caving in, one of the bright spots that I had was I got to work with Jonathan. And we worked in an org that was pretty challenging by a lot of measures. And, we'll talk not so much about that org specifically, but about a lot of our experiences that we've had and what we've learned and taken from that. Jonathan is currently doing a lot of work with AI. And what I find really, really super interesting about him is I know that I can go to him with like a problem and say, hey, what do you think of this? And Jonathan will come back with a totally unique, different way of looking at it, which I'd be, wow, I didn't think about that. And sometimes, as product managers, we get a little bit stuck or we kind of keep working the same way. And I've been really looking forward to having Jonathan on the podcast for a long time. And he's a great guy. I think you're going to get a huge amount of benefit out of this. I'm really looking forward to hearing what he has to say. And without further ado, Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Ross. It's a pleasure to be with you. And as you said, we've managed to work with each other in the past, and happy to kind of use those experiences as catalysts to some of the conversation we're going to go forward with, and how product owners should see things a little bit differently than the cookie cutter and textbook formats that get taught to you.
Yeah, cookie cutter is not one of the terms I'd apply to you. I think you've got such a unique way of looking at the world and dealing with things. And I think one of the things I also really massively respect about you is, I know it's a really hackneyed phrase, but I like using it. You have the ability to talk truth to power. You've got the ability to really say the way that things should be to real senior leadership, whether they want to hear it or not, but where they need to hear it. You've had the ability that I've seen really strongly to be able to push back and kind of go, now hang on a second, that's stupid. Or you might not use those words, but use it in a way that, you'll get leadership to listen to you in the way that goes, hey, this is what we do. So if you wouldn't mind, tell us a little bit about what it is that you're working on at the moment. What are you focused on in product world?
Yeah, I'm focused on a number of things in the product space at the moment, but the key one, as you mentioned at the top of the show, was around AI. Obviously, we all know this is a big advent. It's coming in. It's both scaring a lot of people and inspiring a lot of people in exactly the same kind of balance. And it's trying to figure out where the humanity sits alongside this AI approach and how we can use it to catalyst the work that we do and to produce really good work. And ultimately what we're here to serve to do, which is to serve people and create products that hopefully change their life or make their life easier and so on and so forth. So I set up a company just recently called Digital Visionary, which is designed to come in and consult and strategize with businesses specifically around this topic, and to really help them, guide them through the noise and the different things that are happening out there, and how to use AI in their space without them having to feel like they have to lay off people or suddenly become a major autonomized business. That there's a middle ground to all of that. So that is what I've been doing recently.
So in the product management context, where do you think people should start with AI?
Look at the tasks that you're already doing that are laborious or could be sped up or that become a little bit kind of mundane. And the reason I'm saying start there is because hopefully that will free up the larger amount of time to do the things that are more critical and more important. So, for example, if you have to write kind of reports, or you have to write user stories and things like that, AI is perfect for that. You can write them very, very quick, very succinct in a very typical format. So those sort of things you just want to get off your plate so that you can focus on doing the product manager role and the team success role of really diving into those problems that sit behind the product and what you want to solve for your customer base.
And where would they start? Like are there tools that you would recommend, or is there a way of thinking that you'd recommend they start off with?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, from a tool perspective, there's hundreds of AI tools. AI is not a new thing. It's just become commercialized, I think, is what's happened. So ChatGPT is a good place to start and play. I would very much treat the AI tools that are out there very much in a childlike mindset. Go and play, explore, see what they're capable of. Midjourney is another one if you want to do more kind of image generation. And I've been using that recently to explore a lot more around the UI concepts and in terms of coming up with different variations. It's very good for kind of creating 5, 10, 20 variations, especially off an idea and exploration very quickly, which is based around those concepts in products where you want to try and do a 10, 5, 2, 3, 2, 1 kind of approach where you kind of eventually dial down to the right product that's for your customer base. So Midjourney can really help with that from a UI perspective. Like we said, ChatGPT from an exploratory point of view, strategies, text, those along those things. And there's other ones around video and so on and so forth. But I would say just go and play with it, plethora, and you'll understand where they fit in best. There's even ones, I know there are a number of companies like Airtable and Notion that have started to implement AI as well into their tools to make the kind of project management part simpler and quicker. So there may be something in there as well. I know that Atlassian are also looking at it, even though they're a little bit behind the curve. So there's a number of tools out there, but I wouldn't look to replace it from your core function of what you're supposed to be doing as a product owner or a product manager within your business, which is to be that bridge between the business needs and the customer need and retain that. So you need to find out where you can sprinkle it in between that.
So with Midjourney, would you be able to do UX variations?
Yes, you can. You can do it both on a wireframe level and you can do it on a high fidelity level. So usually that was always one of the things that slowed people down, was that bridge between conceptual design layout to high fidelity, because a lot of stakeholders don't have the ability to envision the product until it's fully formed for many reasons. So this gets you to that state much quicker. Does it get you to a state where you can build and create stuff? There are tools coming out. The new Framer tool, for example, will do a layout for you very, very fast so that you could actually have a functionable tool, not just an image. There are other ones as well. There's a new one called, I think it's UX Pin. They're doing it as well. So it gets you from that concept. We want a page that's made up of these elements or an app and so forth, and it'll get you to that kind of almost ready stage very, very quickly. So yes, you can do UI. What I would state as a caveat, and this is one of the things I'll say against AI, it doesn't know why those buttons are there. It doesn't know why the image is placed in that place. It doesn't know why this element should be above that element. It doesn't have the humanistic logic that we put into place. It's just looked at 100,000 different variations and come up with the best practices from what it is, but it's parodying that. It's not creating that from a sense of knowledge, if that makes sense. So just be aware of when you're using these tools. It doesn't necessarily know the right user experience behind it. It just knows it looks good because 100 other people put it there.
So what I'm hearing you say is, if you haven't got the actual fundamental knowledge of why something should happen for a human being, you need to be really, really careful. Am I hearing you right?
Absolutely, yeah. You can't replace the human from the cog. You need that humanistic insight that makes us all who we are. You need to know why I'm compelled to, basic stuff like affordances. Why do I want to press that button? What's causing the trigger? What does those colors infer to the humanistic emotion? The AI doesn't know that. It has 100 or 1,000 really good examples, and it says based on those examples, this is how it should be laid out. Now that will get you close, but it still doesn't know, as you're saying.
So, in the past, in some places that we've been, there've been engineering teams that have pretty much had the approach of, hey, you're the product managers, just give us more stories in Jira, give us more stuff to chew on, And I've worked in so many organizations over the years where it's all about speed to implement features. It's all about the velocity, because I think Agile or Jira forces you into that way of thinking. Whereas very few people stop to think about, like, should we be doing this? Is this the right thing to do? And do we have enough time to actually sit and think? And, I've worked in some of the largest orgs in the world where that isn't a luxury that you have. So you can show you've got a lot of output. And then if you question, did we actually spend enough time strategically thinking what are the things to do, why we should be doing them? I mean, we'll obviously come up with good answers and stuff, but I always think that one of there are two big problems that product managers face. One is lack of empathy. Like they're so busy focused on the data or looking at the data, or they've been told to be data led or data driven and all these things, which make perfect sense, and they should be. And I think sometimes, because I've now trained thousands and thousands of people over the years, together, with various product analytics tools, literally thousands of people, training them to use them, I found myself starting to get really kind of tied into the rabbit hole of, okay, data driven everything first, and then forgetting, hang on a second, the human beings at the end of the line here that we should be talking to and getting their feedback on. And I know we've got to balance those things, but where do you see AI coming into that, especially when we're talking around things like empathy and being data driven in the product world? I'd really love to get your thoughts on that.
It's a very, very good question. Where do I see it coming into that? Ultimately, I don't think it does. I don't think you can replace that human nature and that human intuition that comes into all of this. Is it? It's more of an amplification. So you may have heard the same sort of comments made around money. Money is not evil. It amplifies the human behavior. And I would say AI is almost a little bit of that as well, where it depends on which direction it's being put into and what you want to use it for. It can amplify those experiences or that humanistic nature, but you still need the source itself, which would be the product owner or the business behind it with that empathetic knowledge. So I'll give you a very kind of basic example. If you tell an AI to make the most efficient route to market, it will do that, but it will do that at the cost of everything. It's very, very clever at doing that. It will just go, right, you need to go straight down this road, forget the human beings, forget the thing. You just need to this gets you from A to B in the fastest route possible. And another example of that in a very more basic way is your sat nav, right? If you want to go from A to B, it will take you to A to B very, very efficiently, but you'll miss not necessarily the fastest route. You will miss not necessarily the scenery. You'll miss all these other things. You've just gone from A to B based on a mathematical equation saying from here to here. So AI is very similar to that. So what we really have to be careful of, and this is what you're alluding to, and I think this is also what separates great companies or good companies from really great companies, is that ability to create space, empathy, to be able to ask questions about what you're doing, and whether we're causing harm and effect or creating a positive outcome for ultimately humans. We're humans building things for humans, and we can't forget that in the processes that we create. So whether we use tools like AI to do that much more efficiently, to bring down the cost, and to go to market much faster, that's okay. You can also tell an AI to find the most humanistic way forward in a route, but you have to pause and you have to think about it before initiating that command to AI to say, I want to include the humans in the route. I don't just want to go from A to B, if that makes any sense.
It makes a ton of sense. And I think where I found it to be particularly useful is especially in documentation, writing, presentations, all those things that, I've been asked to do over the years, and I've never felt necessarily English writing skills or presentation skills necessarily might have been my number one skill, but using these tools, it really gets things that I want to say is, please, communicate that in a way that is super effective, and potentially at volume if it needs to be. If it needs to be a 4-page document that does X, please do X. Or if it needs to be a presentation, let's I can put the bare bones of it. In fact, I remember once you and I were working together, and I think keynotes and trying to put together some charts and things, which right now, AI could have done that like at the drop of a hat and just these are the inputs, this is what I want to say, just, and here are the parameters, and then create it. And I think one of the things I really enjoy about that is it frees me up to be able to focus on, again, what I think the high level things. And I know you've said that, AI is not coming for our jobs, but I do want to say there is one job that I've already lost due to AI. And my wife's first language isn't English. And I used to help her with kind of communication with some emails that she used to send, whether it's to our daughter's school or to customers, whatever it was. And now I've been fired. I'm no longer required because ChatGPT can do that perfectly well. So,
Yeah.
so I guess I have lost one of my non-paying but highly appreciated jobs. But on a much more serious note, I'm really, when I think of product teams, and this podcast is all about product team success, I always think that there's two inputs or two things that need to happen there, right? We need to define what exactly the product team stands for, and whether we call this a run book, playbook, principles, vision, strategy, whatever we want to call it, but it's a set of guiding principles that guide us. And I've sat there with some strategic consulting businesses, and I've sat in lots of these meetings where we define this is what we stand up for, and it usually says things like this is a safe space, and I've always been very cynical about that because I feel if you have to say this is a safe space, it isn't.
It usually isn't. Yes.
Yeah, 100% it isn't. But moving away from the cynicism there, once you've kind of defined like these little goals, the one thing I've never seen in any organization, or very few organizations, unless, I've worked in them or created these things, is a product team success scorecard. How do we measure the metrics that go into product team success, right? What is it that we're doing? So to me, there's always two components. It's like, what is it? What are our guiding principles? Just like anything else, like for your product. Like, what is your product's North Star? But what is your product team's North Star, right? What is it they're going to be doing? And I think that solves a couple of problems. I've seen it solve these problems in the past. Is one, our engineering and our leadership teams don't know that much about product. They really don't, and they haven't got the time to learn. But if you on a quarterly board meeting, or whoever you're presenting to in leadership, if you're kind of going, hey, this is where we were, these are the inputs, this is what we're going to be measuring. It could be communication, roadmaps, data, whatever it is. And this is where we think we could do better. And in the next quarter, this is where we're going to be focusing, and I'll report on our progress in the next quarter. All of a sudden, what you're doing almost by osmosis is you're actually educating your C-suite and your leadership team in what product management really is, and what are the inputs that they can expect to have really good outputs going forward. And so if we've got those two components, we've got our guiding principles, our North Stars, and we've got a way to measure that and moving forward. I feel like that almost allows us to kind of go, great, now let's go and use the right tools that we can, or the best tools. And I've worked at some large organizations and some small ones where you kind of have your hands tied behind your back because it's like, hey, just go create your roadmap in Word or PowerPoint or something. Whereas, what do you think? In your experience, you've worked with so many different product teams. What's your experience when it comes to what I've said and successful product teams?
There's a lot to unpack there. I think going back to your very first point, which is what does the product team stand for in your business? And I think that's really important as your first starting point, because if you don't know what it is, or what role they play, then the rest become more complicated to define, if that makes sense. And despite it having a common title, it's not actually the same in every single business and every single role. There's actually a lot of diversity in terms of what that role does and how it's perceived and how much value it has within a business. And as you said, how much space it has to speak to power about what's right, what's wrong, and champion the user and all those things. So I think that's your first step is to have a very clear understanding of what you think it should be, and then a realistic understanding what it can be within a business setting that you're in. Then you can move on to the things that you're talking about, which is starting to create a measurable way of defining success within business. And those measurable elements are very much about measuring the soft skills, not just the hard skills that are going through. And I think that's really important. And I just want to kind of pause and touch on that for a second, because I think with the advent of AI and all these things, the hard skills are becoming easier, theoretically. The soft skills are going to become more valuable. but there is a change in what the product role will be because of that. And I think we'll become more arbiters of the human champion of kind of those emotions and those soft skills more than we are today. I think right now we play the role more of as a translator between the business world and the development world, and I think that will start to change, and we'll start to become more that kind of sense check and say, are we doing the right thing? Is this going to create the best effect from a user's psychology point of view, not just from a functional point of view? And you can see a few other companies out there like Humane. I don't know if you know about those guys.
No.
So those are the, just to touch on this, I know it's kind of a tangent, but they are ex-engineers from Apple, and they were around building all the big Apple products, and obviously their main claim to fame is the iPhone. So they saw the advent of the change of the human race with that device and how they birthed it and what their original intention was into where it morphed into, and how have now a series of health effects and different things that have come off the back of that device, from too much consumption, always being out of your hand, the social media creating these both true and false realities that people are always trying to measure up to, and those adverse effects. So what they've done is they're trying to, and we still don't know exactly what their product is, they're trying to right some of those wrongs and hence the name Humane. They're trying to create a product that is AI driven, but more from a human-centric first approach. And I think we all need to do that as well within our businesses in a smaller scale. We're not obviously out there to build massive software products and stuff to that scale, but we can do that on a feature by feature basis. Is this delightful? Is this creating the right human feedback? Is it easy, not just functional? Because go back to examples like forms. I can make a really functional form, and it's very large, and it has input after input after input after input. Yes, you get your inputs and you get your data. But it's not delightful. It's a chore to fill out. So you start to look at other products where they break up those segments, and they ask you minimum amount of questions and kind of make them a much more humanistic way to fill in. So we need to always be those sense check for those businesses and say, we can do that, but should we do that? And that's not always the easy answer to answer. And AI is not going to be able to answer it. So we still need humans to do that.
Yeah, I love that because that brings me up to one of, I think, your and mine personal kind of bugbears and things is the whole concept of the minimum viable product. And I've worked in small orgs, medium, large orgs, and everybody's got a different view of it. And I've come to the conclusion that I don't understand what a minimum viable product is unless I absolutely understand the context of that specific product or that company and what minimum and viable and product means to them. And frankly, I think at this stage, after 20 years of the lean methodologies and minimum viable product, it's almost like let's just throw it away. It's more like, my view is, what is it we're trying to achieve? Like, what are the resources we can honestly and understandably throw at it? In what meaningful time frame, and for what customer base or user base or internal base that we need to prove stuff for? And then let's just go do it, and let's just call it a version 1 is my view, or version 0.1, whatever you want to call it. But I don't get this minimum viable product, because I usually just end up having arguments like with engineering. Is it minimum? Is it viable? Is it a product? As opposed to, let's just get a kind of some business requirements document. Let's just kind of define it, and let's just build the damn thing and get the feedback. But I know you've got probably a more passionate view than I do about it. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be a bit controversial, but I feel it's a get out clause for C-suite, basically, to cram as many features as they can in for as little money as they possibly can for as little amount of time as possible. So going back to your point, what does minimal actually mean? Viability, that in itself is a very strange word. I mean, is it functionable? What are we talking? What does viability mean as a measurable target? And products, obviously, that's the only one that actually is pretty translatable. So once you take those first two, you're already off. You're in such a wide kind of variation of what those terms mean, and it's so interpretable that it basically doesn't become anything. So you just need to go back to that kind of core principle. A lot of this came out of the test and learn kind of movement, and that's still going on today. And there's starting to be questions now whether that's the right approach, just throwing anything out onto the internet at whatever development stage it is, and then kind of making it work. And it makes sense from a getting an early audience, being able to change your point of view, see what works from a financial point of view. But it's also producing a lot of bad software, a lot of stuff that isn't ready, bad experiences, and it's not really putting brands in the best light when things aren't working correctly. So there's a lot of things against that. Now, I was brought up in the school of Apple. They don't really do an MVP in the way that we know it in most places. I would, and I've told you this before, I would say if they do anything, they do an MDP, which is minimal delightful product. So they get it to a base stage where if they didn't work on the product anymore, it was very good. It could stay as is. It could work with a great set of core features, and it's a fantastic product in its own thing. Now, obviously, they do iterate on top of that, and they do produce variations of the product. But I think that's something that should be more of an ambition from all product owners and businesses, just try and get to that minimal delightful product. What is the easiest, lightest product we can create? How do we make it delightful, rememberable, something that users want to engage with over a long period of time, irrespective of any new features coming? And obviously, that is a good product for both the business and for the end users. So that's kind of closer to what I think people should be focusing on.
I think that's great. I just wish we didn't use the term MVP again. But I guess it also gives business and C-suite something to hang their hats on and at least feel they speak the language, even if it isn't that useful. I'm trying to be positive here. I honestly think it's a waste of time, and we should just go back to versioning something and defining what it does and just getting that out the door. So
as you know, though, Ross, I've got a pet peeve about how all of that comes about from a budgeting perspective anyway, which is what leads to this MVP conversation in the first place. Yeah. It's a lot of, and just to touch on that briefly, if your product owners don't know, if you're confused why C-suites or anybody else is telling you to do what they're telling you to do, and why you're frustrated with the lack of time that you're getting, and everything's kind of front-loaded so that all the time's given to development and little to you and your design teams, follow the money, follow the rope, and you'll go all the way back up to the thing. And what you'll see is a trading game happening right at the very top, which is a time for money and features. Essentially, is getting traded at the top. And when you do that, it's a barter almost. It's like, I'll give you X amount, you give me X amount of features in X amount of time. And they're like, well, we can't do that. Okay, here's a little bit more, and I'll give you a little bit more. And it goes back and forth without you being part of the conversation. Then that translates to the next rundown of the organization, where it's, hey guys, we've agreed to deliver XYZ feature set for XY period of time with XY budget, make it happen. And so it inevitably produces both generally bad products and these MVPs that come out there. It's like, well, how do we do it? Because you're trying to problem solve. And it also creates this ill intent within your teams, because you never feel like you've got any time. You have to just ship the first thing that comes out the door, essentially, or created by your teams. Your development teams are usually upset because they have speed coding and producing a lot of bugs, and they've been told that they can fix their tech debt later. And it's a compounding effect. So the solution to it, because I can give you a solution, not just going to complain about it. One of the solutions to it is you need to change the way you're budgeting your teams. Now, you wouldn't treat your marketing team like that. Like, we would only give you this much money for 3 ads. Nobody does that, right? So you need to look at this department as something that you're going to fund for a course of a period of time, right? You say, this is my run rate to run this team, and here's some extra money to pay for software and services and things that you will need to make your work. Then you try and figure out what you can deliver within that period of time, but you don't trade it on the time and the money. So if you can meet those goals, great. If you can exceed those goals, even better. But if you don't succeed those goals, it's fine. You've done the best you can within the allotted time, and then you can go again next year and make some adjustments. So you have to do it in more of a retainer run rate than a exchange. But sorry, that was a massive rabbit hole. I just wanted to point that in there because I think it connects.
It absolutely connects. And I think one of the things I love about that is it reminds me of an organization I was at, which was one of UK's, Europe's largest unicorns. And one of the things that was really clear is a lot of the senior, trying to talk in generality so it doesn't look like I'm naming this company, but a lot of the senior product people really didn't understand from a business perspective that they didn't understand the profit and loss, the cash flow. They didn't understand a lot of, let's say, business and management terms. And I remember chatting to Spencer, who's the founder and the CEO of Amplitude last year. And one of the things that he said is that management is going to move more towards like a business and integration with marketing and sales, which I think is inevitable. And I think that when we're living in this little bubble of it's like kind of us and some customers and our engineers, and we don't either have a P&L or we don't have we don't have those business metrics to justify. Like if we build this feature, this is the business impact that it's going to make, right? It's not just this is our customers are going to like it. And I think having that discipline of actually having to respond to that. I mean, as an MBA trained person myself, I feel like every single product manager should at the minimum have an MBA or something close to that, so that when they're actually talking to business, they should be able to go back and say, hang on a second, like, let's actually understand that. And that their colleagues on the other side know that when they're talking about cash flow or P&Ls or whatever it is, that they actually understand the impact of what's going on. And there have been some orgs that I've been at where, senior leadership, product leadership have tried to make sure that their more junior product leadership actually understand that. I think that's going to happen more and more. And I think that there's a bit of I know the Elon Musk thing of, hey, we don't need any more MBAs. And I think there's some truth into that as far as creativity goes. But I think as far as being able to actually understand and justify what you're doing, I think going forward, as the world moves towards a more profitability view and looking at how all the inputs are having specific outputs around profitability, I think that it's going to be super, super important that product managers really understand how businesses work, how P&L accounts work, how accounting basically works, even the most fundamental way, understanding risk, not just from a compliance perspective, having worked in a lot of organizations that are very compliance based, but kind of really, really trying to understand those things. And also, a lot of the time in products, and I was having this conversation with a colleague this week, in product, we don't typically get given budgets, right? Our CPO may have a budget of a head count, right? And the head count, maybe X amount of people for this year. And we may have a couple of tools on the back of that. But the budgets don't tend to sit with products. And I think that is really a fundamental mistake. And even if that doesn't change, I really want to see more and more product leadership and even senior product individual contributor leadership really understand how those, the business impacts for all the things that they're building. Does that make sense to you with what you've seen?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think I just want to divide that into two parts. I think first part is really key. I get this a lot from a lot of emails and messages I get from younger product owners that when they're struggling within a business, you need to talk the language of your audience. It's a fundamental 101. And that goes into, you need to be able to talk money. You need to be able to talk about profit and loss. You need to be able to talk how these things are going to affect what your C-suite care about, what the metrics that they've got put on them to succeed. And the better you do that, the more likely you're going to receive the budgets and the backing and the things that you need and the championing within the business to achieve the goals that you want. So if you're sitting in the corner going, this is what I want, this is right for the customer, but then you have a C-suite member going, yeah, but I need to produce a 20% year-on-year return. It's a non-conversation because both are coming from two completely different spectrums. So if you're able to speak the language of the audience that you're trying to talk to, that will get you a long way. So I just want to kind of put that in there. Going to the other side of what you're saying, which is how does this work for budgeting and so forth, and how gaining that control within the business from a product owner perspective. I agree. I would like to see product teams becoming their own thing rather than being shelved under engineering or shelved under digital or whatever. So they need to be responsible for their own successes. And it also makes it more plausible to be able to translate those into hard metrics that the rest of the business is looking at in terms of returns and profits that they're ultimately wanting to do for the business. This all boils down to that. Is what the business wants to get out of it. Is more money, essentially, or more users, or more return for the money. Now, I will say one thing as well. With the advent of AI and the progression of things that have been over the last 10 years, it's never been cheaper than today to produce products and content and get it out onto the web. It's never been easier. It's never been simpler. And I know you've heard these kind of terms before, but it's a reality that they need to listen to. So if it's never been cheaper, it means there's also more competition because more people can do it. It's more accessible. There's going to be more people vying for your thing. So it's more important for customers to really companies to really differentiate what their service is, why they stand out, and double down on that customer experience. And that's where product owners come back into it, and where you doubly need to start funding your product teams more than your engineering teams, although they come as part of that. Or more than your marketing teams, because marketing teams are easy to track, right? You give them a bunch of money, they put some ads out, and you see what the conversion rate on that is, and was that success or not? Product teams is very hard to do that. You give them a bunch of money, it seems to go into the wash. We're not sure what happened, and then we've got a half-baked product or a great product or whatever out the back of it. So it's harder to measure, and I think that goes back to your scorecard things, where you can measure the internal success of a business, but you also need to be able to measure the external success. So you need to be able to measure things not just based on profits, but also customer happiness and things like that. So there are examples within Apple, for example. They used to say for every for every one person that was upset because their iPod or whatever broke and you decided to treat them badly, they would go and tell 5 people about that experience. So you've got to have that in your mind a little bit as well. So how do you make each and every single customer's experience the best it can be within the product and service you're offering, so that they, become your champions to the wider world and therefore create you more profits? That's what you ultimately get out of that.
What you've mentioned there about Apple, where 5 people tell 5 people, so essentially bad news is exponential.
AI is an advent that's coming up. We're not going to be able to bury our heads in the sand. So I would suggest everybody start to educate themselves a little bit on it and figure out how to amplify those human skills with it, rather than try to use it to, for example, our customer success managers. Unfortunately, they're going to have the X on their head first, because they'd be like, well, it's cheaper. We're just going to bot to respond to everybody. Wrong. That's the place that you should be doubling down on your humans, not getting rid of them. Because that's going to really amplify your customer success, conversions.
Yeah, and it reminds me of a few years ago, you and I think working on one of the world's largest customer success platforms, and trying to add some bots and reactions and probably at that point, I think, because this is still going back quite a few years, it was like, hang on a second, this isn't fully cooked yet. We need to make sure that our knowledge bases are really good, but more importantly, that we can escalate to a human as soon as we can and actually get a proper response here, even though those humans, and I think they were like, subject matter experts, felt dealing with customers was somehow beneath them at some stage. But to me, that's the job. And Jonathan, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast today. It's always fantastic to talk to you, and I hope we can do this again. And if people want to hear more about you or get some advice on how they can apply AI, or where can they contact you?
So there's one or two places. You can obviously find me on LinkedIn. So Jonathan Boice, Boice is the last name. So you can find me there and reach out. And obviously, as I said, we've got the new website up now, which is digitalvisionary.io. You can reach out for me there, and then I'm happy to come into your business and work with you to figure out how to solve this AI problem for your business.
Jonathan, as my favorite digital visionary, it's been fantastic having you on the podcast. And thanks everybody for watching and listening to Product Team Success. See you next time.